Kelly Bremner is going to speak to us today about the strength and wisdom of women in times of trial. Kelly is the mom of Lottie and Twyla and a beloved member of our community. She is an associate professor of theater and women and gender studies at Emory and Henry College. I think she got married recently. All right, Kelly, thank you for speaking to us today.
As I get started today, first let me start with, I was just delighted to see that Karen was the service leader today. It felt like a little bit of poetry from the universe as I was set to talk about women, and so many of the women that I'm looking at on this screen right now are so very, very important to me, including Karen and many others that I've been blessed to share time in our UU women's group. So let me just start with I love that poetry. So with that said, here are the remarks I've got for you today. Often I speak quite personally when you all ask me to speak, but today I'm gonna veer off into some uncharted waters and speak a bit more spiritually. So I hope I do okay. In the midst of all the chaos and pain in the world over this last swath of time, I've been thinking a lot these days about the nature of the universe. I've been trying to understand her, be at peace with her, and let myself be fully humbled by her to better understand her. And I have found that if I let myself really listen, that the path between my quest for knowledge and the wisdom of women is clear. And while a lifetime of UU talks won't begin to scratch the surface of the wisdom found in the hearts and minds and spirits of women, I thought today we could think about a few of the ways that some women's words have found their ways to me and comforted me in my exhaustion over the last little while. And I hope some of these words speak to you as well. I'm going to begin with some words of Maya Angelou. Continue. Into a world which needed you, my wish for you is that you continue. Continue to be who you are and how you are, to astonish a mean world with your acts of kindness. Continue to allow humor to lighten the burden of your tender heart. Continue in a society dark with cruelty to let the people hear the grandeur of God in the peals of your laughter. Continue to let your eloquence elevate the people to heights they had only imagined. Continue to remind the people that each is as good as the other and that no one is beneath nor above you. Continue to remember your own young years and look with favor upon the lost and the least and the lonely. Continue to put the mantle of your protection around the bodies of the young and the defenseless. Continue to take the hand of the despised and the diseased and walk proudly with them in the high street. Some might see you and be encouraged to do likewise. Continue to plant a public kiss of concern on the cheek of the sick and the aged and the infirm, and count that as a natural action to be expected. Continue to let gratitude be the pillow upon which you kneel every night to say your nightly prayer, and let faith be the bridge you build to overcome evil and welcome good. Continue to ignore no vision which comes to enlarge your range and increase your spirit. Continue to dare to love deeply and risk everything for the good thing. Continue to float happily in the sea of infinite substance, which set aside riches for you before you had a name. Continue. And by doing so, you and your work will be able to continue eternally. Beautiful, isn't it? Beautiful. This is a poem written by Maya Angelou for Oprah Winfrey in 2016. But how this poem came to me is the thing that I want to talk to you about today. Maya Angelou and Oprah Winfrey are such wise and amazing women, and I am humbled to be doing this trip around the sun, as it were, at the same time as them. But I don't know these wise women. I do believe in the infinite power of the universe and her gift of putting in my lap people when I need them and words when I need them. And so this poem here was sent to me at the end of a very rough week by our own Becky Worth Jones. When she sent this to me, I stopped in my tracks. I breathed them in, and I needed those words. And I thought others might need them too, and so I shared this poem instantly with a number of others, including my friend Travis Prophet, who was charged that very week with giving the invocation at a faculty meeting. And lo and behold, he chose to make his invocation the very poem I just read to you. And in that room, on an unbelievably stressful Wednesday, those words meant a lot to a lot of people. Maya Angelou, to Oprah Winfrey, to Becky Worth Jones, to me, to the hearts of many of us right here in Emory, Virginia. A lot of what I want to speak to you about today are the ways in which the wisdom of women is so often buried, because you don't find the words of women the same ways you sometimes can find the words of men. Women's words have been repressed throughout history, and so our traditional paths of research as a path to wisdom or studying spiritual institutions will often omit women's valuable voices. And so we have to look differently. Back in June, as we got closer and closer to the solstice, I personally decided to up my studies of earth-based religion, which I practice personally, but rarely in community. I chose to watch some dear friends of mine and read everything that I could tell they were reading based on their posts on social media. Amy, Jen, and I took a stolen afternoon to make a private shopping appointment at a witch-owned apothecary in Iowa, Andrea. This place is a place I've often found wisdom when I needed to find it. In my quest for knowledge in that chapter of my life, I came across an article by Dana Gerhardt, an article which sticks to me and I can't quite shake it. And I'm going to share with you what I found in this article today. In this article, she talks about how the ancients used to interpret things like plague and sickness as messages from the gods. When trying to interpret the message, Gerhardt says, you need to figure out which god is talking to you. And in this article, Gerhardt makes the argument that this pandemic is a message from the goddess. And she makes the argument that the pandemic is female. And I was pissed about this at first. I mean, how dare she, right? That pandemic is, this horrible thing wreaking so much pain and destruction on our world. How dare we see that as female? But I read on. And in her words, I found a message of radical acceptance of the present moment. Let me show you how her proofs work. I love how she writes this article. She writes it like she's Nancy Drew. She lists the clues that she finds to back up her argument. So refreshing for someone who's used to reading academic writing. So here are her clues. Clue number one, that COVID-19 comes from the divine female, is it requires us to come and stay at home, which is her domain. The spaces attached to gods are spaces like offices, factories, universities, battlefields. Those spaces are being drained while we all were asked to come home. We were asked to turn to the more basic concerns of food and shelter and caring for one another. We've also come to see one another in our most intimate spaces, as we see celebrities, politicians, teachers, speakers at our church zoom in from their homes, from their intimate private spaces. And that act of seeing our homes lets us peer into the deeper humanity of people who sometimes can seem godlike. We've also come to see undervalued work that is so often dominated by women, work like nursing and teachers becoming so very public. We hear words like essential and we see signs that call out these people as heroic. Clue number 2 from Dana Gerhardt, that COVID-19 comes from the divine female, is we slowed down. And when we did, many of our leisure habits aligned with the female. For those for whom the pandemic has meant more time, that's not me, but for those of you who which it did, we started to bake bread en masse as a culture. We baked so much bread that you could not find yeast on the shelves of any grocery store for those first couple months where we all had to stay at home. We also started to garden at record levels. People who had never gardened before suddenly turned to gardening. Greenhouses were bare, seed sales were through the roof. We tended to Mother Nature, and as we tended her, she healed. Rivers and airs became cleaner at an astonishing pace. Also, as we slowed down in our stillness, in the pandemic, many of us confronted some truths about ourselves and the larger world that we live in. Remember those workers that we deemed as essential, as heroes? Well, this pandemic has also exposed deep cracks in our social systems, and the working poor, many of whom are deemed essential, and Black, Indigenous people of color have borne the greatest burden of this pandemic. And we've come to see that, which brings Gerhardt to clue number 3. Clue number 3, that COVID-19 comes from the divine female, is massive empathy. There have been many who have speculated that the reason our collective cry for racial equity, for example, has been so loud in these past few months has been because of the pandemic. Gerhardt says, the new spirit around the planet is breathtaking. And whether or not one thinks it's goddess-driven, it is worth our awe and it is worth our reverence. Masculine gods work through logic, force, and power, but the goddess works with something stronger. Using the coronavirus, she took us out of our thinking and doing and into a core of deep feeling and deep being. And during the weeks of the quarantine, she softened and then awakened our hearts. And overnight, it all got too painful. And suddenly it was hard to look at the inequities that have been under our collective nose for years. An astonishing, transformative tidal wave poured through so many hearts all at once and brought us to the streets. So what does this all mean for me, or maybe you? The effect of this article on me has been one of radical acceptance. While this read, as it were, of the virus more resembles the ways in which we might mine a poem or a novel for symbolism, it also helps me to look into the challenges of a world with an open mind and accept the good lessons and takeaways in my small sphere. Our hubris coming back at us with rising rates of infection. If indeed the pandemic is female, she's also stubborn, and we will need to yield to her and change as a people to move forward. There is no other way. Another woman whose words have been speaking to me in this last few months is Pema Chodron, the American Buddhist nun whose writings have become so popular lately. Again, on the topic of radical acceptance, her words reached me in the gut last week in that liminal space between Tuesday's elections and the results. Like many of us, I was trying to come to some kind of understanding about what was happening and what might happen, and what it meant that we were so divided as a nation. And how could 70+ million people vote in such a way that was so opposed to what I believe in my core as the most basic of ethical principles? And in my disappointment and frankly fear of what some of that means for us, her words found her way to me. A dear friend, who many of you know, Andrea, is leading a reading group on this book right now. And as a result, I think lots of words from this book keep crossing my path. When Things Fall Apart, Heart Advice for Difficult Times. It's a great book if you've not had a chance to read it. It's beautiful. I can't find the time to join a reading group, but I think it's interesting that her teachings have found me nonetheless. And there's one key passage from that book that I cannot shake. And here's what it is. Nothing ever goes away until it teaches us what we need to know. Nothing ever goes away until it teaches us what we need to know. If you dig deeper into Chodron's writings, you'll see she focuses on how fear and pain function in the world and the importance of paying attention to those things that hurt us and those things that we're afraid of, rather than avoid or run from them. I don't mind saying here that I am afraid of those 70+ million people, some of which could be in this Zoom room with me right now, and who certainly live in close proximity to me physically in this community, and some of whom are dear to me and dear to people I love. And what I want to do, and frankly, what I'm doing right now, at least for now, is I am protecting myself by avoiding and running away from those people. I also know that I'm able to do this only because of my place of privilege, and that allows me to run away. And I know soon that my awareness of that privilege means that I will need to roll up my sleeves and get to work, but I have no idea what form that work needs to take. Chodron says what we're talking about here is getting to know fear and becoming familiar with fear, looking it right in the eye, not as a way to solve problems, but as a complete undoing of old ways of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and thinking. The truth is that when we really begin to do this, we're going to be continually humbled. She goes on to say that when things fall apart, it is a kind of testing, but also a kind of healing. We think the point is to pass a test or to overcome the problem, but the truth is that things don't really get solved. They come together and they fall apart. They come together and they fall apart, and they fall apart again. It's just like that. The healing comes from letting there be room for all of this to happen. Room for grief, room for relief, room for misery, and room for joy. From this point of view, the only time we can really ever know what's going on is when the rug's been pulled out and we can't find anywhere to land. I find myself thinking that no matter who has led this country historically and how I feel about those leaders, hatred and jealousy seem to emerge in our history again and again. Racism lives, and it lives strongly. Sometimes it hides beneath surfaces where I can't see it as blatantly, or rather I can't because of my position in the world. But it lives maybe in some of those times in the hands of the so-called silent majority, and other times it is emboldened and visible. Entitlement to women's bodies and the desire to control and subjugate those bodies lives on the surface and below. Brown children are put in cages, whether by immigration laws or by an implicit school-to-prison pipeline that stretches back centuries. Basic human rights, like those to marry the person we love, are debated in Supreme Court nominations and Thanksgiving Day tables, as though queer Americans and their families are somehow lesser and should be grateful that we allow them to exist at all. And I guess my point here is Chodron's point, that nothing ever goes away until it teaches us what we need to know. In here, I see a call to get to work. We have not learned what we need to know. And this will keep coming back, as it has to, throughout time, because there is something fundamental we have not yet learned. As a people, yes, but as I'm coming to think these days, there's also things I've not learned as an individual. And this is where I hear her call to humility, and I hear that humility coming before my fear in this moment. We have so far to come as a nation and as a community, but I have to, in my fear, look at myself and recognize how far I also have to come. I don't know yet what get to work means, but I know what it doesn't mean. I can't run from this. None of us can. Remember clue number 4, that the pandemic is a message from the divine goddess in the form of massive empathy, that we are in the streets, both protesting and dancing. Protesting this summer and dancing this November says to me, a lot of us are ready to get to work. And so when preparing my words for today, I find myself thinking about you all around me. And I'm hopeful that you all and we all together might come to understand collectively what it means to move past and through this moment. How will we as a community get to work? And might we share this work among ourselves in order to move forward? Thinking back to Chodron again, she says, the most precious opportunities presents itself when we come to a place where we think we can't handle what's happening. It's too much. It's gone too far. We feel bad about ourselves, and there's no way we can manipulate the situation to make ourselves come out looking good. No matter how hard we try, it just won't work. Basically, life has just nailed us. And in those moments, that's when we're given the opportunities to open up or shut down. Let me end my remarks today by thinking, I'm going to end with disclaimers. I thought about beginning with disclaimers, but I thought I might set myself up for failure. So I'm going to end with the disclaimers. Are you ready? This woman right here, me, I'm tired. And this talk is imperfect. It turns out that raising and schooling 2 girls full-time while working full-time in a global pandemic, even though I have the most amazing community of support, it is still profoundly exhausting. If this talk is lacking, I hope you'll allow me to admit the challenges that I face in attempting to juggle it all, even though I am so grateful you let me talk to you anyways, and it's actually a profound joy of mine that you let me. I find myself thinking about women worldwide. Women are in a mess right now. Women are leaving the workforce in record numbers to manage the demands of this challenge and its inequities in the home in terms of domestic labor are being exacerbated, not remedied by this moment. Women are at their breaking point, and sociologists tell us that women may pay in terms of their path to equity for years and years to come due to the setbacks women have already experienced in the past 7 months of this pandemic. Women are at their breaking points globally, and that collective struggle will come at the cost to the fabric of our communities. And so what I'll end with today is a challenge to you all, to us all, to me, is that so often when we seek spiritual wisdom, we turn to the voices of men. And there are systemic reasons deep in our history that make this so. If you are in the practice of seeking out or reading such texts, I wonder what it would look like if you made a commitment to read the voices of women just as often as you read the voices of men. I wonder what would happen if we as a community made a commitment to learn more about earth-based practices of religion, many of which have been maligned throughout history in great part because of the central role that women play in their canons. And most importantly, if you have one takeaway from this talk that I want you to hear, is that all of the great texts that I engaged with above only came to me because of the way that I engage in women who are personally so dear to me. Women that I admire, local spiritual leaders, women I work with, women I raise children with, women who will come and sit in my backyard and try to make sense of the world alongside me, women who will stand by my side when I need support. Who are those women in your life? Listen a bit more carefully to them and what is speaking to them, and you just might find that the universe is sending the messages that you also need through her to you. Thank you.